Hi, I'm Saira Hamilton of Small Aubergine, and I'm going to be cooking one of my recipes with you today. The recipe we're doing is lamb bouna. It's one of my absolute favourites. Really classic, simple but fabulous. You do need quite a lot of onions for this recipe because that's going to make the majority of the sauce that we're going to have. So we've got a nice hot pan so you can hear that sizzle straight away, and that's what we want to do. That's what we want to get. I'm using about 1 kilo of lamb here, so I'm actually going to use 2 onions because I want to get quite a lot of flavour in there, and we'll need it. Now I can talk about onions for ages, I won't, but onions are really, really important in this dish, and in fact in most curries the onions are almost the most important bit of it. I know it's a very humble vegetable, but they are going to give us so much flavour, but not just flavour, they're going to give us a lot of colour. And the only way that we're going to get that is through patience. We do have to cook these for quite a while. And whenever I do any of my lessons, I do go on about it. My students, I think, know that I can bore about onions. But it's so important, and I promise you that if you do it this way, and if you give your onions plenty of time, you're going to notice a huge difference in the finished product, both in terms of the colour, the flavour, and the depth of flavour that you get, because the onions will really cook down, they're going to soften, they're going to go very sweet, and they're going to go really gorgeous sort of bronze colour, and that will give a lot of depth of colour to the sauce as well, to the finished sauce. So they're all in there, cooking away. These are going to cook for quite a little while. And you mustn't skimp on this part of the process. While we're waiting for the onions, I'm going to talk you through the spices that we're going to use in this recipe. There's nothing all that exotic, it's all things you can find in your local supermarket, so I'm hoping that all of you will have a go at this and see the sort of results you can get with some fairly ordinary store-cupboard spices. The only secret in the spices is we're going to use sort of layers of spicing. The first are whole spices. So if you can see here, I'll tip them out for you. We have got here some dried bay leaves. I'll put them here for you to see. Dried bay leaves are going to go in. These are cardamom pods, just green cardamoms. You can usually get them anywhere these days. They smell absolutely gorgeous, and what we're going to do is we're going to start the spicing off with these. We're going to fry them in the oil, and they're going to give a beautiful fragrance and aroma to our curry. And then this, the third whole spice that we're going to use, is cassia bark. It's a type of cinnamon. This you tend to get in Indian shops, but I promise you can use cinnamon, it'll be absolutely fine. The only thing is that this is a bit milder, so if you were using cinnamon, the sort of big cinnamon quills, I would probably just use half of that and just keep them whole and stick it straight in. So these are the whole spices. You can see I have a number of sort of rules that I like to follow when I'm cooking. One of them is to be prepared. Have all your spices ready in little bowls, because all this cooks at quite a high heat. So we want to be ready. We don't want to be burning onions while we're waiting and measuring out all our spices. So it's really good to have all this done in advance. So whole spices are ready. The next stage of our spicing, the next layer of flavour that we're going to introduce, is garlic and ginger. Now these are our aromatics, and it's really important in this sort of dish that you have plenty of garlic and ginger. We're using lamb, which is a very robust meat. It can take it, so that's okay. We're not going to overpower it. So this is basically a paste of garlic and ginger, which I've made before. It's very easy to do. If you don't have these sorts of pastes ready-made in your fridge, obviously I would just get 6 or 7 garlic cloves. It's quite a lot of garlic, 6 or 7 big fat cloves, and use a grater to grate them, or a garlic crusher, whatever you've got handy. And similarly with the ginger, probably about 1.5 inches of ginger, so quite a bit, and then grate it, or just puree it in one of those little mini blenders, or even just chop it really finely. It doesn't really matter, as long as you've got it sort of there ready to go. So that's there and ready. Then next, onto the really wonderful stuff, all of these gorgeous spices. This is my masala dabba, which is how I have my spices, but obviously yours can be any way you want them to be. So I'll talk you through the ones that we're going to use, and I'll give the quantities to you as we're going. The first one is turmeric. turmeric is this beautiful bright yellow spice. It's very powerful, you don't need a lot of it. In fact, if you can taste it, you've got too much of it, to be honest. So just about half a level teaspoon of turmeric, and that's going to go in the bowl, ready to go in when we're ready. The next thing is cumin, ground cumin here. Now, we can use quite a lot of the cumin. It's a beautiful spice, it goes really, really nicely with lamb. So I'm actually going to use a good heaped teaspoon, and then about half again. So 1.5 heaped teaspoons of cumin, 1 heaped teaspoon of ground coriander, that's going in too. Now, chilli. I've got 2 types of chilli here. I've got hot chilli powder and I've got Kashmiri chilli powder, which is a very bright, beautiful colour, bright red, but quite mild actually. I want this to be quite spicy, so I'm going to use the hot chilli powder, and I'm going to use a good teaspoonful of that. The next thing is garam masala. Garam masala is a blend of spices. I've seen recipe books that say you put it in at the end. I've seen lots of recipes that say grind it yourself. I don't do that. I buy a brand that I like and I stick to it. And it's basically a blend of lots of whole spices, cardamom, cloves, pepper, mace, all sorts of things go into it. But I'm just going to use a good sort of heaped teaspoon of that as well. And the very last thing I'm going to put in is salt. Now, salt is quite, it's quite important. You can cut down the salt, but you will need to use some of it. And I must say, one of the main reasons for that is that it enhances the flavours of the other spices. Also, it does a lot for the colour. Don't ask me why, I can't explain it in chemical terms, but I know that if there isn't enough salt in something, it doesn't look the right colour. In fact, my mum used to be able to look at a pan and say, you haven't put the salt in, because she could just tell by looking at it. I don't know how she did it, but there you go. So I'm going to put in 1 level teaspoon and a bit more of salt. So that's our spices ready. And now we'll just wait for our onions. You do need to move these onions around occasionally, but you don't want to be constantly stirring them, because if you do that, they never get the chance to go brown. So you have to leave them for a bit and then move them around every couple of minutes or so, but just keep your eye on them so they don't burn. Unfortunately, there's nothing you can do to make onions cook quicker. All you need is patience. So I hope you can now see that we're getting a really nice colour on these onions, and we really do need to do that. Some of you at this stage might be a little bit concerned. You might think it's a bit burnt. It's not burnt, it's caramelised, and that's what we're after. So keep going with it. Be brave, be patient and be brave. So I'm happy with the onions now. We've got a really good colour on them. They're really cooked down. They're nice and soft, so we can go on to the next stage. Now, because we're nice and prepared, it's all going to be easy. So first, the whole spices. You put those in first, and just toss them straight into the hot oil, and then stir them around. And as they sort of get, although they're dried, these spices, when they get reintroduced to a hot pan and a hot oil, it will release all the aromas, all the oils that are inside them, and all of that sort of fragrance and flavour will come out. Now, obviously you can't smell this, but if you were here, you'd know that this is starting to smell quite good now. Once your whole spices have been in for about 30 seconds and you can start to smell them, when you can smell them, that's when you move in with the next layer of flavour. For us, that's the garlic and ginger. Now be a little bit careful because it might spit at us here. So garlic and ginger straight in. And you're going to hear that start to sizzle now because of all the moisture in there. And then as soon as they're in, you can go in with your ground spices. All of them in all at once. It's really important that we cook these spices for a good couple of minutes. That stops them being harsh, and it sort of just allows all of that flavour to develop and come together. Now, if we just cook those spices in the oil for a couple of minutes, then they would actually burn, so we don't want that. So we're going to add some water, and that will help them to cook. Now at this point, the spice mix is going to bubble, so you need to be a little bit careful it doesn't spit at you. So I've added the water into there. So I've got the spices, the water, all cooking away, we're going to be left with a beautiful, shiny looking curry paste in the pan. And this, what we're actually doing now, this cooking out of the spices, this is called the boona. This is where the dish gets its name from, the lamb boona. So the actual process that we're doing of cooking the spices, adding water, cooking that out, that's called the boona. And you'll see as we keep going with this, again, we have to keep stirring it at this stage because we don't want it to catch, we don't want it to burn. And it's going to cook down and it will become this really lovely looking curry paste. As you can see, we're nearly there. Most of that water is cooked away, and if you can see, when your spoon makes a line in the bottom of the pan, that means that the sauce is kind of thick enough to go to the next stage. So the boona is complete and we now have our curry paste. And again, I'm just sorry you can't smell this. You'll have to try it yourselves so that you can see how gorgeous it smells at this stage. Right, now we're going to put the meat in. This is a one-stage dish, one-pot cooking at its easiest. This is lamb neck fillet. I've got about a kilo of lamb here. So it's plenty for sort of 4 people, even 6, depending on how greedy you are. I'm using lamb neck fillet, which I particularly like because it's got a lot of marbling in it. There's a lot of fat in it, and that fat means that you're going to have a lot of flavour from there. Traditionally, a Bengali dish would actually be used with lamb on the bone, which is the best thing. Well, traditionally it would be goat actually, but using lamb on the bone is the way that it would normally be done. But you don't have to, and I know most people don't like eating lamb on the bone, but I can assure you get a lot of flavour when you do use some bones. So at this stage, the lamb's gone in. We want to keep the heat quite high because putting all that meat in will have reduced the temperature of the pan, so you need to whack the heat up a little bit. And what we're basically aiming to do is to seal the meat. We're going to seal these pieces of lamb in the beautiful curry paste, in that spiced oil, before we turn the heat down. So we want everything to seal, and then we're going to get a really beautiful, juicy, tender pieces of lamb. If you turn the heat down right now, again, if you're impatient like I used to be, you turn the heat down, put the lid on, forgot about it, it will just kind of boil and it will be a little bit watery. It'll still taste okay, but it won't taste fabulous. So we're going to wait a little bit longer. Again, patience is one of those virtues you're going to have to learn. I hope you can hear that sizzle. So I've got a nice high heat, and this pan's got a lot of heat in there. And when you're stirring this dish, I do tell off some of my students, if I see them stir, when I say stir it and they just kind of poke at it, don't poke it, stir it. Which means get right underneath, almost like a folding action. You get underneath and turn it over, and then all your pieces will be covered in all this gorgeous spice paste. Okay, so all of the lamb has been sealed now. It's been sealed in that curry paste. So what we can now do is reduce the heat, and then we'll just let that cook away, basically until it's done. That could take, it really depends on the tenderness of the lamb. It could take anywhere between 20 and 40 minutes. Usually, it will be towards the sort of 30-40 minute mark. And to be honest, you can't really overcook it. As long as you keep an eye on it, make sure it doesn't burn, make sure it doesn't catch on the bottom. We just want a nice low heat, lid on. And although at the moment that looks quite dry, you'll be amazed at how much moisture will be generated once we put the lid on and let it simmer away. So now that lamb is nice and sealed all over, all we need to do is put a lid on it and move it over to a lower heat. So now we're going to make paratha, which is a pan-fried bread, a flat bread. It's a really nice flaky bread, which is sort of a cross between bread and pastry. And I'll show you how to make it. It's really simple, really quick, and I guarantee that you're going to want to try it. So what I've got in the bowl here is self-raising flour, white self-raising flour. You can mix it up with wholemeal if you want to, that's absolutely fine. But I prefer the sort of the texture that you get with this white flour. All I'm going to add into that is a little bit of salt, about half a teaspoon of salt, just to give it some extra flavour. And then to that I'm going to add ghee. Now, ghee is clarified butter. You can buy it in most supermarkets these days, but if you can't get it, just use normal butter. All I would do with your butter is heat it in a pan, and you'll see that all the sort of whitish milk solids will fall away, and then what you're left with at the top is this beautiful golden butter, and it's pure butter. You can just use that. But I'm using ghee today, just a good dollop of ghee into that flour, and then in with your fingers to rub it in, a bit as if you were making pastry. It's a lot like that. You're just going to rub it in until you get a mixture that looks a bit like rough breadcrumbs. But as you can see, when you get something that resembles kind of quite, you know, sort of sandy breadcrumbs, then we're going with our water. So to this, we're just going to add water. This is room temperature. It's not hot, it's not cold, it's somewhere in between. Just put it in, and then we use in a well in the centre, and then we'll just bring it together slowly. And you want a dough that is really quite soft and silky, not too wet. It's very pliable actually. You're looking for a nice pliable soft dough. So this is what we're left with. This is our dough. As you can see, it's very easy to work with, very soft. You don't really need to knead it very much. So we just need to give this a really quick knead. It is quite easy. And as you can see, it sort of comes together, comes off your fingers. So my fingers are quite clean now. And when it gets to that stage, you know it's ready. So then, all we're going to do is sprinkle a little bit of flour down on the board. Now, there are people more talented than I that can get a perfectly round paratha. I'm not one of those people, so I've got a cheats way to make sure that all your parathas look brilliant. Basically, we're going to roll it out, and we can be quite haphazard. Doesn't really matter. It rolls out really easily, so it's a very soft dough, very easy to work with. And then we are going to put a little bit more butter in. So, just using a pastry brush, get a little bit of the ghee, and we're going to paint it on. Not too thick, because don't forget there's already some butter in there. We're going to paint that all over, and then we're going to fold it up and sort of put it on the inside like an envelope. And as I said, it's like a cross between a pastry, like a flaky pastry, and a bread. And then we're going to roll it out again. So what will happen is when it cooks, those layers of butter will help the bread puff up and make it taste really great. And then we're going to do it again. Exactly the same thing, a little bit more butter. Not too much, you can see I'm not absolutely drowning it. It's just a good sort of layer. You just paint it on. Then we're going to fold it up again. A little bit more flour on the board. And we roll it out again. So really simple, but when it's cooked, all that lovely butter will give us loads and loads of flavour. Okay, so it's ready to go in the pan now. So you need to get your pan nice and hot. And I'm going to drizzle in a little bit of this extra virgin rapeseed oil, which I find absolutely fantastic for this sort of thing. Gives a beautiful colour. And you could fry it in even more butter, but honestly that would be a bit much even for me. So I'm going to use this rapeseed oil, and you'll see it'll still get a really lovely colour on it. Just a drizzle in there, and then we're going to put this straight into the pan. Lay it in carefully so the oil doesn't spit at you. And that's literally going to take about a minute on each side. Should be a medium hot pan. You don't want to cook too fast, because then it will burn, it won't be cooked through to the centre. But it really is as simple as that. We're going to fry it in the pan, it'll take a couple of minutes each side, and then we're ready to eat. So that's had about a minute on one side, and that should be ready to flip over any minute now. You can just use the back of your fish slice or spatula to push it down at the edges. And then we're going to flip it over. Hopefully it'll be a beautiful golden colour on that side. You can see that looks absolutely gorgeous already. And we're just going to cook that for another couple of minutes. And that's all it takes. Now if you're doing a whole load of these, what you can do is roll them all out and stack them up on a plate, just in between layers of greaseproof or kitchen paper, and just do that until you're ready to cook them all at once. And equally, once they're done, wrap them in foil, keep them in a clean tea towel, and they'll stay warm for quite a while. You can always reheat them in the oven before you're ready to eat. They're really simple, and they're quite easy to work with. They're not difficult. So that's had a couple of minutes on each side. Looks absolutely gorgeous. It's golden and coloured and cooked all the way through. Now we're going to make some coriander raita, which goes really beautifully with the lambuna, and it's very, very simple to make. I use one of these little whizzers, one of these little mini food processors, which are great. You don't have to use one. You can use a mortar and pestle, of course, or you could just chop everything very finely and mix it up. That would also be absolutely fine. But just for ease of use, we're gonna use this thing. Right. So the first thing we're going to start with is coriander. Quite a lot of coriander. We'll use a nice healthy bunch of it. Yeah, let's get all of that. And we're just going to put that into our blender. Now, I'm losing some of the stalks from the bottom just because they're a bit woody, but we do want the stalks. The stalks have a lot of flavour in it. When I see people throwing away the stalks, I get very grumpy. The stalks have probably got much more flavour than the leaves, in fact. So we really don't want to lose that. We want to use it as much as possible. And in fact, if you ever find coriander with the root still attached, that's even better. The root has so much flavour. You have to give them a really, really good wash. But then if you put that in, it tastes phenomenal. So coriander's gone in there. We're going to use some garlic. Next, chilies. The perfect chutney, accompaniment, raita, whatever it is needs to have balance. It needs to be a really good balance of hot and slightly sour and slightly sweet. So obviously we're going to get the heat from this chili. Because we're going to use yogurt as the sour note in this dip, we can be quite generous and use a fair bit of chili. I'm one of these people that thinks life is too short to de-seed a chili. But if you want to be absolutely clear how hot your chili is, there's only really one way to find out, and that is to taste it. So just nip the end off, rub it on the back of your hand, and give it a lick. And I can now tell you that chili is quite hot, but it's not mind-blowing, so I'm actually going to use the whole thing. So into small chunks, seeds and all, put the chili straight in. And then we're going to add a little bit of salt, just to help it along. And also a little bit of sugar. This is just plain white sugar. Any type of sugar will do. And then we're going to give it a whiz. There we go. Hope you can see that. Let me move this away. And then we're going to put in our yogurt. Now the yogurt, this is just natural yogurt, and it adds that sour note to the dish, and it'll also calm down some of that heat. You see that? Really, really simple. I think that took less than a minute. And there we go, ready to go. So there we go, there's our coriander raita, which we made in under a minute. Okay, so our lambuna's nearly done. I'm just chopping a few spring onions and a little bit of coriander just for a garnish to make it look pretty when we serve it. And a little bit of fresh coriander as well. Okay, now it's time to check on the lambuna, which is looking absolutely lovely. So you can see how much liquid has come off that to make a really beautiful, rich sauce. And just for the last 5 minutes or so, I'm going to leave the lid off and let it cook down a little bit more, then it'll get even more beautiful. The sauce will thicken up a little bit and it will coat the lamb, and then we'll be ready to eat. That's absolutely lovely. It's really, really good. Seasoning is spot on. When that's served with the raita, it's got a bit of a kick to it, but the raita will cool it down, and with the bread it's going to be absolutely delicious. So thanks very much for watching. All of the recipes are available on my website, which is www.smallaubergine.com, and I really hope that you enjoy making this yourselves at home.